Just after the start of the new year, my dad and I headed out on a road trip through New Mexico and Arizona. We left San Antonio early on a rainy Tuesday morning and drove all day, with the goal of making it to White Sands National Park before sunset. Thankfully, the clouds broke a few hours into our trip, making it sunny and warm the rest of the drive. We arrived around 4 p.m., about an hour before sunset. It was the perfect time of day to be there. We had enough time to drive through the park and walk around the white sand dunes before taking in the sunset and waiting for the stars to come out. My dad has a list of national parks he'd like to visit. He came up with the idea a few years ago as he was approaching his mid-70s and has been working his way through the list. Although White Sands wasn't on his list, I knew he would enjoy it. It also made a nice stopping point for the first day of our trip and a gateway to the other sites we wanted to visit. After the sun set, we decided to check out the one hiking trail inside the park. I can see how people could easily get disoriented out here. It's always a good idea to bring offline maps and check your location with GPS. The next morning, we were up early for the drive across New Mexico to northeastern Arizona. We got north of Alamogordo, and not too long after we turned west, the surrounding land turned black. I told my dad that it had to be a lava flow of some sort. It turns out that it's one of the youngest lava flows in the continental US, and it can be seen from space. Called Malp meaning Badlands, it encompasses the northern part of the White Sands Missile Range. The lava came from a vent in the northern part of the area not far from where we drove through, and flowed south over 40 miles. Our drive on day 2 was around 6 hours, and we got to Petrified Forest National Park a few hours before sunset. Are you sensing a theme here? My original plan had us going through Petrified Forest in a couple of hours, then driving over to Meteor Crater just before they closed around 5 p.m. But my dad, a former science teacher, was so fascinated by the area, I knew that pushing through just to get to Meteor Crater would take away something from the trip for him. So we stopped at every overlook and trail and took in the entire park, finally making it to the end of the park right around the time they closed the gates. That evening, we stayed in Winslow, Arizona, and as we were eating dinner, I noticed a flatbed Ford across the street. Snowed a little bit overnight. The next morning, we woke up to snow. We made our way to Meteor Crater and arrived just after they opened. I knew this would be a fairly quick stop, and that we'd be able to make it to Tucson while there was still sunlight. Get out of the way. Don't come on the road, Bessie. Meteor Crater was formed about 50,000 years ago from the impact of a meteorite that was about 160 feet across. It doesn't seem that big when you first walk in, until you start looking through the telescopes, and realize that the figure at the bottom is a representation of a 6-foot-tall astronaut. Before we got underway to Tucson, though, there was one more thing I wanted to see. Two Guns, Arizona is a ghost town along Old Route 66, but it started as a wagon crossing point for Canyon Diablo. In 1878, a group of Navajo murdered over 40 Apache in this area by lighting a fire outside a cave where the Apache were hiding and shooting anyone who came out. The fire asphyxiated those who remained in the cave. In the 1920s, the site had a fuel station, a zoo, a restaurant, and a gift shop, and offered tours of the Apache Death Cave. The bridge in the distance over Canyon Diablo is an original part of Route 66. We had been told by someone at our hotel in Winslow that Interstate 40 had been closed overnight because of snow and Flagstaff. As we got back on the road, the closer we got to Flagstaff, it became evident why the road had been closed overnight. Our time in the snow was short-lived, though, as we made our way down from Flagstaff towards Sedona, Phoenix, and ultimately Tucson. There are two parts to Saguaro National Park. The original section is in the southeastern portion of Tucson, while the newer section is just northwest of the city. That's the part we were going to on our first day in Tucson, and we rolled in, you guessed it, just a couple hours before sunset. The saguaro cactus is native to the Sonoran Desert and can be seen throughout southern Arizona. They can live to be 150 years old and don't get their arms until they're around 70 years old, when they're typically about 6 feet tall. This portion of the park has a gravel road that goes up to a trailhead, and seeing as it was the first chance this trip I'd had to get the tires dusty, I took advantage of it, and I'm sure glad I did. The next day, we visited a place I'd been wanting to go to for years, the Pima Air Space Museum. We got up early and got there right when they opened. The amount of aircraft in this place is incredible, and we spent a solid 5 hours walking through all the exhibits. I've always been fascinated with aircrafts of all types, but especially military aircraft, and this museum has them all. It sits right next to the aircraft boneyards at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, which we drove by on our way to the original portion of Saguaro National Park that evening. Since we'd been on our feet most of the day, we decided to just enjoy a leisurely drive through the park, then go find some dinner. On the last day of our trip, we got up before sunrise to head to Chiricahua National Monument. But before we got there, we had a little unexpected side adventure. There was a deer in the road, and its antler punctured my tire. And I do not have the same size spare, nor do I have a jack that can lift this, so we're waiting for a tow. Lesson learned. I've been meaning to get the spare replaced with the same size as my other tires, and when I go out from now on, I'm going to carry some concrete pavers so I can use my bottle jack. After a tow back to Tucson and a short wait at Discount Tire, we were back on the road a few hours later than we intended. We arrived at Chiricahua around midday. Chiricahua has been a national monument for 100 years. The monument was established to protect the amazing rock formations that we'll see in a bit, but the park also acquired Faraway Ranch about 40 years ago, which was one of the last frontier settlements. There were bills introduced in Congress in 2022 and 2023 to make Chiricahua a national park, and with scenery and history like this, it definitely should be. We had lunch at Masai Point, and I walked down the trail a bit to take in the scenery. I don't know about you, but when I think of southern Arizona, I don't think of snow, but there was plenty of it around, since Masai Point is at almost 6,900 feet above sea level, and the adjacent Sugarloaf Mountain is at nearly 7,300 feet. I had one more adventure in store before we headed back to San Antonio that involved putting Nugget through the paces on a Forest Service road and taking her up and over the Chiricahua Mountains in the Coronado National Forest. Well, we asked at the visitor center about this road, and it says it's not maintained for winter travel, and it has snowed here clearly because there's snow on either side of the road. But we just don't know if it's actually open all the way through. We're gonna find out, and if it's not, no big deal. We'll just turn around and go back the way we came. We're passing through just over 6,100 feet right now, so it's gonna get snowier. Hopefully just the sun on the road will have made it melt a bit. The snow wasn't anything I couldn't handle, and the road was mostly clear, save for a few hunters we came across. There's a ton of dispersed camping along this road, and it looks well used. I would guess it's a safe haven from the desert heat during the summer months. We topped out at just over 7,700 feet and then started back down the other side toward Portal, Arizona. It took us an hour and a half to go 17 miles. This is exactly the kind of driving I love to do, slow and easy on less traveled roads and enjoying the scenery along the way. Pictures can't do this justice. This is absolutely incredible. Just the colors on that rock. Now we are in New Mexico. This was an amazing trip, and one that I'm glad I was able to make with my dad. There are definitely some places around here that I want to visit again.